Welcome to our next virtual Stampex talk. I'm delighted to introduce Jonathan Guy. I've been trying to get Jonathan to do a talk at virtual Stampex for a few years now. We finally hooked him in. So I'm going to keep him here. We're not going to let him go for an hour. I'm going to hand over to you, Jonathan. You're going to be talking to us a little bit today about the Barbados Keyplate stamps and their 1880s usage.
Great.
So without further ado, over to you. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Suzette. Yes, you're absolutely right. You have been talking to me for quite some time to try and do this, and I have resisted. I thought very well actually for the last couple of years, but finally I've given in, and here we are now with me and a talk. It's about the Barbados Keyplate issue 6. So it's a 4-year period, and they put out this set of stamps. And I have to be honest about them. I found them very dull the first time I came across them, but I've learned that there's actually quite a lot more in them. So before we start, the first question, and Suzanne, did you see the slide change there?
We haven't actually, no, we need you to just knock that one on one.
Okie dokie. In that case, if I can just go back, um, play that. There we go. Uh, there you go. That should be right.
Yeah, perfect.
So I think the first thing I should probably do is let you know who I am and why I'm talking about Barbados stamps. And I wasn't going to do this until somebody pointed out to me just yesterday that most people watching this will have no ideas who I am or what I do. So my name is Jonathan Guy, and amongst other things, I run the website Barbados Stamps. This is the site where I have written about Barbados stamps and philately for the past 15 years, and I continue to add to it on a regular basis. So all the new issues go on there, as well as research articles about stamps and covers that I've found as part of the collecting journey. And last year, I was very fortunate. I was invited to become a co-editor on a rather wonderful book, which was the update of M. Fitzrowett's original book on Barbados Britannias. Um, Sadly, Fitz passed away a few years ago, and the baton for this was picked up by Peter Ford, the late Peter Ford, and then finished last year by myself and by Paul Farriman from the West Indies Philatelic Study Group. So if you're interested at all in the early stamps of Barbados, this is from 1852 to 1882. So in other words, the ones immediately preceding the ones we're looking at today. Then this is the book for you. And there's a link at the end of this presentation for where you can actually get a copy of it. Um, so I've been collecting Barbados stamps for about 15 years now. And the reason I got into the Barbados area was I still had a small collection when I started, but I was collecting GB, and the GB stamps that kept coming out, I was getting more and more frustrated with because they were just being churned out with no apparent thought. And I didn't enjoy most of them. And 2012 was the end of it for me. I decided that's it with GB stamps because they issued all the Olympic Games ones, and they were enormous, great sets of stamps, 6 for each winner. 6 stamps per winner, and I just thought, well, that's over the top. So I cancelled my standing order for British stamps, and I looked around. I thought, well, which country shall I collect? And now Barbados I'd been to, and I actually loved the island. I thought it was a wonderful place. And I looked in the catalogue, and sure enough, there was only about 7 or 8 pages, and that was the entire output of Barbados from 1852 to 2012 at the time. And I thought, wow, that can't be that hard. I'll collect Barbados, and then I'll do another country. Anyway, here we are, all those years on, and I still haven't finished collecting Barbados. And in fact, I don't think I ever will because there's so much you can get into once you actually get there. And I've gone from being just a stamp collector into somebody who studies all aspects of stamps and philately with Barbados. Which brings us to this lot. So these stamps, the 1882 to 86 issue, this is the keyplate issue for Barbados. Keyplate was familiar throughout a lot of the empire. And as you can see here, that's the full set of stamps. They're not difficult to get. This particular set was or is for sale currently on eBay. So if you want this set and you like the look of it, You just have to Google Barbados stamps 1882 and this will come up. The reason I took this image was because it shows quite nicely the shades involved in this set. So you've got two of the green, you've got the carmine and the rose for the penny. You've got two twopenny halfpenny shades, and they're hard to tell apart in some cases. Similarly with the two threepenny shades, though you can get one which is noticeably darker, which in this case is the one on the left. You get two shades of the fourpenny, and then you get single shades of the other four stamps. So in terms of why they were issued, because the Britannias are brilliant. They've been in use for 30 years. The colonial postmaster was in correspondence with the printers, and the printers wrote to say, look, we've got this new way of printing stamps. We think you would take advantage from going over from your line engraved stamps, which we're producing, and using these new surface printed or typography stamps. It would be much cheaper to produce the volumes you want moving forward once you bought the original die plates. And of course, saving money was a big thing then as it is now. So they said, well, yeah, let's give it a go. So they decided to move over to this new keyplate issue. And in 1882, the first stamps were ordered and issued, and that was the halfpenny, the penny, the twopence halfpenny, and the fourpenny grey. Now, the first three values went out in August of that year. The fourth value, the fourpenny, went out in December of that year. And that was it for a couple of years until 1885, when the threepenny stamp was issued. And then you move on to 1880, oh, sorry, also in 85, you had the fourpenny brown was issued. And I'll come on to why there's two different colours there. And then the sixpence, the 1 shilling, and the 5 shilling were all 1886. Now, those shades look quite interesting, and you might think that there's different, printings which equate to those. There are to an extent, but there was no deliberate move to actually do different shades of these stamps. It's just the quality of printing back there wasn't fabulous, and there was little consistency. And the stamps had to be printed in London and shipped by boat out to Barbados. So you do get variations in printing over time. So don't read too much into the shades, but you can collect them like that. And the designs, as I say, change. Now, yeah, on the left here, we've got the sixpence that was the De La Rue Britannia, which I use as my icon on pretty much all my social media channels. And then next to it, you've got the sixpenny from this new typography set, surface printed. Honestly, I prefer the De La Rue. I think it's such a nice, wonderful, vibrant stamp, and it's got so much detail in it. I've always preferred the Britannias. The 5 bob, not so. Although the 5 shillings Barbados Britannia, it's an iconic stamp. It's one of those that's missing from a lot of collections, but it is one that you do need to get. They were often used on parcels. Finding a good used copy like this is quite hard because a lot of them took a bit of a bashing as they went through the postal system. But the 5 shilling on the typo stamp, I do quite like the surface printed one there. The colour's quite nice, and you can find some really nicely used examples of that one. Although I have to say, it's actually harder to get a nicely used example of the 5 shillings on the right than it is on the left. So the next question is, how were the stamps used? Well, as I say, I started as a stamp collector, and having collected the set, I collected the mint, and then I got a used set as well. I thought, well, that's it. I don't need to do anymore. But then I started seeing all these envelopes with the stamps on, and I got a bit intrigued as to, well, what were they used for? Because if you think about it, stamps are just they're just bits of paper which have been printed, that giving a nominal value to them, but they were printed for a reason, and the reason was that value was supposed to be used for something. And that's when I started to get really interested in the postal history, because, well, what were the values used for? Why did they produce these values? What was the purpose of the stamps? And have we got examples of how those stamps were used practically? So this is the kind of broad overview of what they were used for. And I say it's a broad overview, it's not complete. There's other examples that I've not included in here. So on the Barbados rates from 1882 to 1892. Bit of context here. First of all, rates changed through that 10-year period. Okay, so the rate, for example, to the USA was fourpence, and then it was subsequently amended to tuppence halfpenny. It came down. So you get envelopes going to the States and to North America at both rates. Um, Barbados joined the UPU, the Universal Postal Union, in September 1881, and that changed things as well because that standardized not just the rates across the whole of the UPU membership, but it standardized some of the colors as well. So the color you were expected to have on that stamp was the same that we used in other colonies, and over time they brought these together so everyone could recognize what color was what value. So, of the first issues that went out there, the halfpenny, the penny, the tuppence halfpenny, and the fourpenny grey. The halfpenny was initially intended for inland mail, and you could send mail overseas, but only printed matter, which was unsealed. And the reason for that is if you were involved in commerce, for example, the idea was to encourage you to send stuff out and not really put a barrier in the way of actual commerce itself, which is almost different, very different, almost 180 degrees from what seems to happen with governments today. But back then, they wanted to encourage commerce. They wanted people to do that. And so dealers would print off lists of what they had in stock and for sale and the prices that they currently offered them for. And they were called prices current. And they would fold these and put them in an envelope and send them unsealed. And they were unsealed so that they could be checked to make sure that they weren't writing on it as well. Because if they wrote in it, then it had to go at the higher rate. And the higher rate was a penny. But during the period, of course, things changed. So the halfpenny was used for inland and overseas printed matter and newspapers under 4 ounce. And also during this period, we've got inland and overseas at a penny and newspapers at a penny. So you can find different uses for these two different stamps. The tuppence halfpenny was letters up to half ounce to all the UPU countries, and non-UPU was 5pence. Now, there was no 5-penny stamp. There hadn't ever been a 5-penny stamp in Barbados at that point. So you often see two tuppence halfpennies put together to make up that rate. And then the fourpenny grey was letters to the UK, for example, or on to America. And that was up to a half an ounce. Above that, you had to pay a higher rate. In 1885, they introduced the threepence, and it's a strange one, really, because there'd been a threepenny stamp on Barbados prior to this. Would you believe SG63? It's the one in the catalogue just before that nice pink 5 shillings I've shown you before. It's a brown stamp. It was introduced and it didn't really get much usage, which is why it's quite highly catalogued. There's no real use for a threepence stamp, and during this period, there is no rate for a threepenny stamp. So why they produce this is still a bit of a mystery. The books don't actually tell you. Only we assume, other than the fact that they'd used up the stocks of the old Britannias. And then in 1886, we have the three last values coming. Oh, sorry, 85 again. We have the fourpenny brown. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. And then the three higher values, 1886. Sixpence was, I suppose, inter-island rate. So if you wanted to send something from Barbados to Montserrat or Guadeloupe or Jamaica, that's where the stamp would have come in handy. The shilling was the old packet rate to the UK, and you often see covers with the Barbados Britannia 1 shilling stamps on, and there's lots of those around. And the 5 shilling was really only for higher rate stuff like parcels. So you had all these different uses, and if you're going to collect the covers, you can look for the different uses. We haven't got as much time today as I'd like to show you everything, but I'll certainly show you some examples of each of these stamps and their usage. So first up, we've got the halfpenny green. As I say, there's two different shades of this. There's a dull green shade and a standard green shade. They've all got Crown CA watermark. There are some inverted watermarks known. These are harder to find. You don't often come across those. All the stamps in this issue are typography. They're all from Dullaroo and they're all Perf 14. But those two different shades mean that you can start looking for different things. But more importantly, you can actually find them on cover. So this one, again, how do you tell what shade that is? It's such a hard thing to do. There's no real way of pinning it down, but this is why I've kind of gone more for the postal history side of this, which is, well, actually, this is a really interesting cover because this is addressed to LG Abrams Esquire at Lowthers in Christchurch, which is great. It's a nice pre-printed cover effectively. It's gone from Bridgetown to Lowthers for a halfpenny. And Mr. L.G. Abrams is very well known in Barbados circles, not least of which is because there are so many covers with his name on. One of the things that he did very, very well, and maybe this is partly because he was the second clerk to the judicial establishment. He was very particular about filing stuff away. And he seems to have filed most of the correspondence that was sent to him in this period because you can find all kinds of covers with his name on, addressed to Lowthers in Christchurch. Um, this is a halfpenny rate, so it's gone just inland printed matter. It's up to half an ounce, which is great. Um, there's nothing spectacular about it other than that it's a lovely, neat cover showing the stamp being used for the purpose for which it was printed, as is this one, which is the halfpenny going to Nova Scotia. It's going to Halifax. It's handwritten. We're assuming this one's a freight report, and we're assuming that it's gone just on the printed matter rate. But this is one that is sent in 1893. So this is quite at the back end of the period we're looking at. In fact, some of the covers I'll show you today are 1892, 1893. So they're the real end of the period when these were being used. Finding stuff earlier is a little bit harder. If you come across stuff, that's worth hanging on to. But there's lots of good examples out there of when these stamps were actually used. Um, Here's one I particularly like. This was 1892, and it was sent just after, a couple of months after, the next issue, the one that came after this Keyplate one, which was the first seal of the colony. And you can see those two blue stamps in the top right-hand corner of the envelope. That's the new design that they'd introduced at that moment in time. It's got Queen Victoria on her chariot, excuse me. But the cover also has 5 of the key plates on. Now, this cover has gone to Van in France. It's from Hanschel and Co., which means it's probably a freight report. Freight reports were effectively sending comments and details of how much freight had been shipped and whether it had arrived safely. In this case, it was quite a big letter because it was the second weight step. It was 7.5 pence in old money. And what they've done here is they've put the 2 tuppence halfpenny stamps on. They clearly haven't got 3. Or if they did have 3, they decided not to use them, and they're using up now the old halfpenny stamps. Because bear in mind, at this stage, 1892, the new set had just been issued, so they've probably got these in a stock in a drawer, and they put 5 of them on cover. And I haven't seen many more with genuine usage with more of those stamps on cover. So I particularly like that one. But it gives you an idea of how the stamps were used in practice. The penny stamp, again, you'll find lots of covers with the penny stamp on because, once again, it was the inland rate. It was also an overseas rate. And this, I think, is a pretty good example, and not just of the rate, but of the 2 different shades, because you can see the carmine shade on the top cover and the rose shade on the bottom cover. And once again, it's sent to our lovely friend, Mr. L.G. Abrams in Lowthers. Now, this is interesting, and these 2 covers for me are both interesting because they also have parish cancels on them. So you can see on the top cover is the best example. The stamp has been cancelled with a combination CDS and boot heel canceller. Now those 2 bits were together, okay, they were sealed together. And so what the clerks would do is they would cancel it so that the boot heel went on the stamp and the CDS, the date stamp, would go to the side of it so that it would be clear when the envelope was sent. It was quite important to them to make sure that the mail travelled at the right times and was delivered within the time frames that were specified by the post office. And you can see in the bottom left hand corner there's a receiving mark which I've blown up just beneath it, and the receiving mark was Christchurch. So Christchurch was the local post office for Lowthers, and this one has got an April the 25th 1892 cancel on it as well. So it's left Bridgetown presumably in the morning. It's got to Christchurch post office presumably lunchtime or early afternoon. It's had a cancel put on it, and then it's been delivered to Lowthers that same day. So posted in the morning, delivered in the afternoon. Sometimes it was delivered by lunchtime. This was the service, the postal service that was available at the time. And just to give some context, from Bridgetown Post Office to Lowthers, which is just north of the airport, today's airport, if you were walking it, it would be 3 hours. So you can only assume there was some kind of horse and cart contraption that was taking the post around the island. But this was so important to Barbados. They needed to get post from Bridgetown out into the other parishes. And it was very, very important that it went at the right time and was delivered at the right time. So these parish marks, when you see them on cover, they're worth collecting. Christchurch is one that's not as common as some of the others. So that's pretty good. I love this cover because once again it's a single penny. It's an inland rate. It's from St John. Oh, it's from Bridgetown to St John. But you can see from the Boot Hill canceller there that this has been cancelled, and it's been cancelled on the 23rd of December. But the St John's receiving mark is the 24th of December, and the reason is that whoever was sending this had gone to the post office too late, and they'd missed the bag. They'd missed the transport that had gone out to St John for that day, because St John's is in the far east of the island. It would have been quite a trek. So they've had the too late cancel put onto it as well, and then the parish cancel underneath that when it's arrived the following day. This too late cancel was to specify that it was actually too late. They didn't not do their job. They'd done their job, but the person sending it had actually arrived after the bag had left. So again, instructional cancels like that on covers, really, really interesting because they tell you so much about what's going on. And then the penny was also available for use for overseas. And you can see again the contrast in the carmine and the rose shades here. Love these covers. These are, again, commercial. They are freight reports going to different companies. The first one in the top right is going to Pernambuco in Brazil, which is rather nice. That's from Da Costa & Co. And then Laurie & Co. at the bottom have sent this one to Gothenburg in Sweden, which is superb. And if you think about the distances involved, all of that was for a penny. It's marvellous. Love it. Absolutely love it. The next value is the tuppence halfpennies. I've used two used examples here rather than mint, just because it's easier to show you the shades here. So there was a sort of an ultramarine and then this deep blue shade, which is far, far nicer to my mind and certainly stands out a little bit more than the ultramarine shade. And here's a letter again, 1892 at the back end of this. This is sent to Quebec. It's going from Barbados to Grand Grève in Gaspé in Quebec in 1892. Now, on this cover, it's really quite a busy one on the back. On the front, it's not too bad. It's had the CDS and Boot Heel. Somebody's looked at it and realised that the postie might not realise where it's going, so written Canada in pencil. And you'll see in the top left-hand corner, it says per Bermuda. So this is the name of the ship that they'd identified that they wanted this letter to go on. And this is one of the sort of quirks of the philately at this period. If you wanted to send stuff overseas, you'd take the local newspaper, the daily newspaper, because it would print which ships were in and which ships were going where. So it would have the dates and the timetables and the names of the ships, and you could decide which ship you wanted it on. So this one's gone on the Bermuda, which is lovely. And if you wanted to trace that, there are books that will help you do that and show you how long it took and all the rest of it. But you can see from the last line of this, it actually just took 14 days to get there. And on the back of the cover, there's a whole range of other cancels. So you've got back stamps from there's a New York paid all cancel, which you often see. There's a roller cancel, which is the 30th of June. You've got another New York cancel on there, so it's obviously gone through another part of the postal system there, and then Gaspé on the 5th of July 1892. Here's the first weight step. So this is the two tuppence halfpennies used together, which I do quite like. Once again, this one's going from Barbados to Syracuse in New York. And it's an odd cover. This one had me puzzled for quite some time. So two things about it. First of all, the rate's absolutely fine, which is no issue with that. And at the top, they've written per Oregon SS. So this was the ship they wanted it to go on. And then somebody's realized that actually that's not the right one. So they've crossed it out and written Clement instead. So they changed which ship they wanted it to go on. Now it's going to New York, it's going to Syracuse, and you can see from the blow up of the Syracuse Council that appears on the back. Um, it appears to have arrived on October the 80th, 1893, which seems a bit weird. And I was scratching my head for a while thinking, why would they put the 80th? But if you look at the dates, it's got the New York paid all cancel on October the 29th. So I'm guessing it got to Syracuse on the 30th. And clearly somebody's put an 8 instead of a 3 in. So again, little bits like that just bring the cover to a bit more to life. Now we come on to the threepence. As I said, there was no real use for a threepence, but there are two shades of it. There was a couple of printings of this one, issued in 1885. This is the only cover I have. You don't see many covers with threepence on them. You really don't. This one I particularly like because it's a lovely registered cover and it's gone to Sierra Leone, Freetown in Sierra Leone, in 1892. Um, so there's a whole load of cancels all over this one. So there's plenty of story that you can get from this one. The actual transit time is a month and a day to get from Barbados to Sierra Leone, and the reason for that is because they didn't just go straight across the Atlantic. They went across the Atlantic up to the south coast of Britain, offloaded there, took the coach into London. Mail was sorted in London. It was sent on another coach up to Liverpool, where it was put into a bag, which was then gone to a ship, which then came all the way back down to the west coast of Africa. And you can tell all of that from all of these different councils that are over the cover. And if you look at the dates, you can trace how long it actually took to do that. This cover's been bugging me for quite some time, and I can't figure out how it is correct because in 1892, registration overseas was tuppence. So you'd expect them to pay tuppence for registration and fourpence to send the cover. The problem is that is a one penny registered envelope. So it's only worth one penny. So it seems to be underpaid by a penny unless somebody's used it as and given the registration to them at the inland rate rather than the overseas rate. That's the only way that makes sense. Otherwise, it's underpaid by a penny. And again, all this kind of information is available in the books. You just have to put it all together, and it's a bit of detective work, which I do quite enjoy. As I say, I've only got that one cover, the threepence. And when I was doing the research for this, I found two others, and that's all I could find. And these two are both available on the West Indies Philatelic Study Group website. And I'll give you the link to that at the end of the presentation. And they're both in Ray Stanton's collection. And Ray's got these two. So he's got the top one to Baltimore, and I think the bottom one's to Baltimore as well. But top one's quite interesting because Ray's view on this is very much this is a single threepenny stamp overpaying the tuppence halfpenny rate to the USA. I can't disagree with him on that one. The bottom one is the threepence and a penny together to make a fourpenny rate. And again, that makes sense. And you can see there's a St. Peter parish cancel on that one as well. So it's a particularly nice cover. I do quite like that one. So if you find threepence used on cover, it's definitely worth hanging on to. For goodness sake, never soak it off, whatever you do. And now comes to the fourpenny grey. So the fourpenny grey was actually not in use for very long. It was issued in 1882 and it was superseded 3 years later. And the reason it was superseded was the colonial postmaster wrote to the printers to say they needed to change it. And they needed to change it because working in the post offices by candlelight, the postal clerks were having real trouble distinguishing between that and the halfpenny stamp. And it's not something we'd think of today because we've got modern lighting and you can see the difference quite clearly. But that grey and the light green, they were merging together and they were making mistakes. So that was the reason it was changed. Now, it's also the reason why that stamp is incredibly expensive. Mint, in fact, is probably the bar after the 5 bob. I think it's the most expensive stamp in the set. Mint. It's a 10p stamp used. There's loads of them, but mint very very difficult to get a hold of, particularly a good copy, and that's because they just used them all up. They used everything up and replaced it then with the fourpence. So I've just got an example here, just the one to show you. This one's sent to Philadelphia in 1885. So this is just at the end of its use when it was about to be replaced. Again, nice boot heel combination on the cover. Very simple. Gone by standard sea transit, and that was 3 weeks to get there. And this is, this is quite interesting because someone's put received 23rd of March 1885 on the top in a very nice script, which appears to be contemporaneous. But I don't understand why the question mark is in there. You either knew it was the 23rd of March or you didn't. But there you go. The CDS on the rear actually does have the 23rd of March in there, so we can see how long it took to get there. Fourpenny brown, this is two shades again. We've got the deep brown shade and then there's a pale brown. And again, this was just due to the inconsistency in the printing. Nothing to read into that at all. This one is a registered letter. Again, it's the correct rate. It's 1887. It's sent from Barbados to Liverpool. Looks a bit untidy as an envelope, but the pattern those days was to put a big blue cross over everything that was registered, so it was immediately clear that it was a registered envelope. You could see the printed envelope had a red cross on it already, so there was really no need to do that. That cross was the determination for registered, but it took a while before they got out of the habit of crayoning things. You can tell the dispatch date, it's there nicely. It's June the 8th, 1887, and there's a nice Liverpool receiving mark on it on the 26th of June 1887, giving a transit time of 18 days to get a registered letter from Barbados to Britain. Contrast that with current day. I've just received 3 registered letters from Barbados. They were sent on the 5th of February and they arrived on the 27th of February. So it took longer in 2026 to get a registered letter when you have airplanes to fly the things on than it did when you had to take it by boat in 1887. Read into that what you want. I do quite like these two covers. These two covers arrived at the same time. Now, I don't know. I think these look like it's the same handwriting. It's pretty similar. And both of them are mourning covers. So mourning covers were the type of envelopes that would be sent when somebody had died, and they had a black outline around the envelope. And you do often see these things. It was one of the things that happened in the Victorian times. They would send these. So one was sent in 1885, one in 1886, both to Bedminster near Bristol. Nothing spectacular about them other than the fact that both of them went onto eBay in September 2024 by 2 completely different sellers in 2 parts of the country. They were not related. They don't know each other. Private sellers just selling stuff that they'd found. And I managed to buy both of them at the initial starting price. No one else bid on them. No one was interested. And I don't understand how these two at exactly the same time came to both be on eBay. And then when they looked as if they'd been written by the same person, they definitely both went to the same address. So I thought that was quite nice, and I put those together. But when I do an in-person display, there's room for a third one on there, which is this one, which was sent in February 1886, and it got there in March 1886. This one's addressed to Miss Thomas in Bedminster. So it's the same address, same morning cover style. And oddly enough, exactly 1 year on from when I bought them on eBay, I found this one. So it just goes to show you have to keep looking for these kind of things. So that's the fourpenny brown used. The next value, and this is the last one in this sort of the lower values, if you like, is the sixpenny. The sixpenny, the shilling, and the 5 bob were all issued later on, as we know, in 1886. They'd presumably been using up the old Britannia stamps, which were still on hand. Now, this makes sense when you think about it because stamp stocks tended to move quite slowly at the higher rates. At the lower rates, at the halfpennies, the pennies, and so on, they were churning through them at a rate of knots, and they needed lots of them to do the jobs. But sixpence and upwards, it was quite an expensive thing to do. Most people couldn't afford sixpence on an envelope, so it was quite hard to find sixpence, shilling, and 5 bob used. In this particular instance, it was issued in 1886. The only thing we can see that from the records that this would have been used for would be inter-island mail. But to date, I've not found a single example. And this is the only value in this entire display where I don't have a cover to show you. I've got nothing. Not only that, I can't find one in any of the major Barbados stamp auctions in the last 10 years. I also can't find one on any of the dealers' websites. I also can't find one on any of the displays in the West Indies philatelic study group. So if you see one of those on cover, please let me know because I'd love to add it to this display because it is such a wonderful, wonderful thing. Sixpenny stamp, I still don't think that one's a patch on the Barbados Britannia. But the one thing to note about this particular stamp is in terms of value for the stamps. If you look in the catalogue, you've got the 5 shilling is the most expensive, followed by the 4 penny mint. After that, mint and used, the 6 penny is the hard one. This is the toughie to get hold of, and finding good quality examples is really quite difficult. So yeah, keep your eye out for the sixpence on cover. And so we moved to the 1 shilling. The 1 shilling on cover was very hard to find as well. And in fact, I've only got one example of this one, and it was this one. And it's absolutely 100% guaranteed a philatelic cover. And the reason we know this is because anyone who collects any Commonwealth material will know the name Geo.F. Jackson. George Jackson in Norton Grange, Knowle in Warwickshire, used to produce these covers. He'd get them sent to him from all the different parts of the British Empire, and usually with the high values on. It was just one of those things that he did. Again, it's a registered envelope. It's got the blue cross on it. It's got the registration etiquette in the bottom left-hand corner. It's got the registered cancel in the top left-hand corner, which is always good to find. And then it's got number 4 written in manuscript and a 4 with crayon on it. And those notations are usually quite typical of collectors who were sending a batch of covers back to themselves so they knew that they got them all back. Again, this took 20 days to go. It doesn't pay any rate. It's 2 and 4 pence, which pays nothing at all. In fact, you could have sent lots of letters for 2 and 4 pence, but we're delighted that Mr. Jackson did because nobody else really was bothering. And if you find something with just a 1 shilling stamp on it, it's worth hanging on to. And when I was researching for this, I did a bit of a Google search for Mr. Jackson, and lo and behold, I found cover number 5. And this one is actually on the West Indies Philatelic Study Group website. It's part of Robert Lebeau's collection. And as you can see, in this case, it's got 1 shilling and 2 4 penny stamps on there, but it is still a philatelic confection. You'll also notice that this one is registration number 2213. This one is registration number 2214 and marked number 5 in the series. So all we need to do now is find registration numbers 2212, 11 and 10, and we'll have all 5 of the covers that were sent to him that day. And then finally, the 5 shillings. The 5 shilling, what a lovely value, a lovely stamp. I've got a couple of really nice used examples of this one, including one with a very wonderful parish council on it, which is hard to find. The 5 bob on cover is almost impossible to find simply because it wasn't used on cover. So the only thing you can find is a philatelic version of this, which this definitely is, as given away by that number 2 written in the top left-hand corner. And again, it's not in great condition either. It's got a tear out of the corner, but it is so unusual and unlikely that this one had to be purchased from one of the major auction houses because they don't often get out into the wild. It's just got the 5 bob on it. It's gone from Barbados to Baden-Baden in 1894, which is really towards the end of the period we're looking at here. And some collector, God bless them, wanted to do this, which means that we actually have something we can show you today. And if it wasn't for these philatelic uses of the higher values, there would be no covers really to show. So just to finish off, when I was researching for this, I was putting together scans of the covers. Now, this particular cover here I'm showing in a display I'm doing in person tomorrow, and I'm giving a similar talk tomorrow. This particular cover, however, I've shown for the last couple of years, and I've shown it with a story. And the story I've been telling is very simply one of a disgruntled customer. So what's happened is this envelope to Reverend Chaz Wright or Charles Wright has been taken to the post office, clearly with the fourpenny brown already on it. So they've put the stamp on, taken it, given it to the clerk, who's gone bang, bang with a canceller, one on the stamp, one to the left of it, which was the current pattern at that time. When they moved away from the boot heel onto just the CDS, they would do two cancels, so you had a clear one on the envelope. So again, you could see the dates and times of when these things were delivered. But the clerk's at that point probably gone, hang on a second, that feels a bit heavy, and stuck it on the scales and realised it's over half an ounce. And because it's over half an ounce, he's informed the sender, you owe us another fourpence if you want to send this. So the sender's probably not that happy about it. And you can see they've stuck on Queen Victoria upside down and sideways on, presumably as some kind of protest. But then the clerk's got the canceller again and gone bang, bang, bang across and hit all three stamps smack on with the cancels. And they're all tied to the envelope and they're all tied to each other. And it's a perfectly legitimate, commercially used cover. It's wonderful, apart from the fact it's falling apart. It's so tatty because it's lightweight paper. What I hadn't spotted until I did a scan and stuck it up on screen, and Suzanne, thank you for forcing me to do this, because this has changed how this cover now is shown. I hadn't realised that it's got the St. John malformed 5 in it. Now, what is the St. John malformed 5? Well, I also collect Barbados postmarks. So the postmarks and the cancels of these, you can collect the parish cancels and all sorts of other bits and pieces. This malformed 5, I already had an example of it, which you can see from the envelope, from the stamp on the right hand side here. This one's from 1885, from July. And you can see that that where there should be the number 5 for the St. John parish, it's got a sort of an S squiggle in it. So something's clearly gone wrong with this. Now, this is known, and it's known to Barbados postmark collectors, and particularly known to Michael Hamilton, who is probably one of the most knowledgeable people on Barbados postmarks, and in fact, West Indies and Empire postmarks. So and having already bought this stamp from Michael a couple of years ago, and I already have the penny, the halfpenny, and the tuppence halfpenny with the malformed 5, I thought I'd ask him about this cover. So I sent him a scan and said, look, I found this. I didn't realise I had it, but it was bought in a collection a few years ago, and I've been showing it, but I'm not actually cottoned on to the fact it's got the malformed 5. How common is it to find this on cover? And he replied back immediately saying, I've never seen one on cover in 40 years. So as far as we know, this is unique. So this is why this display has now changed, and why the way I talk about this cover has changed, because it appears to be the only known example of the St. John malformed 5 known on cover. I showed this on Twitter or X about 6 weeks ago. Put it up there, which I thought that'd be quite interesting. And then one of the wonderful people who follow me on Twitter, and I follow him as well, is a guy called Peter, who's under the handle at Stamp Den, and he also has a display at the moment in this Stampex. So go and look up his display. He wrote to me with this, which is that it was likely sent by the Reverend Alban Henry Wright, who was the third son of Charles Wright, who it's addressed to, because he was sent out in 1882 to be a tutor at the mission house. And you can see from the white clip that he sent me, he says, where he will be chaplain for the Society's estates and tutor of the mission house in connection with Codrington College. Codrington College is in St. John. It ties the whole thing together. So we know where he was. He would have gone to the local post office. He would have got the cancels on there, and the cover went to Northallerton in 1885. So it's a fabulous cover, one that I'm really quite pleased to own now. And the previous owner hadn't spotted this. I hadn't spotted it, but now it is written up properly, so it won't go unnoticed in the future. And so we get to questions, which I think is pretty much on time. Throughout the presentation, I've actually mentioned 3 different things. So I've mentioned my website, which is barbadostamps.co.uk. So there's a link to that there. I mentioned the Barbados Britannia Issues book, which you can buy at pennymead.com. from David Druitt, and then the West Indies Philatelic Study Group. And if you're not a member and you're interested in Barbados or West Indies philately, please do join.
That's fantastic. I think I saw that Peter at Stamp Den's actually here in
Wonderful.
your talk. So hi Peter as well. It's
Very
nice
good.
when we know each other from Twitter and
Oh,
things.
yeah. Without that piece of information, we wouldn't have been able to square the circle. Just get everything in one place and say, yeah, this is definitely a genuine cover, sent at the right time from the right place. So yeah, it's if you like the provenance that we needed.
Fantastic. So if anyone has any questions or comments to make, if you put those in the Q&A box for us, that'd be great. And related to that, sort of that point about using social media to make connections,
Yeah.
we have a question here, which is what percentage of your research do you do online versus traditional libraries, museums, and study circle group meetings? So I guess the whole kind of virtual versus in-person
Cool.
thing.
It's a very good question. I can't put a percentage on it. Right. So, I'll give you an example. Here I have right next to me some of my philatelic library. So something like this, which you can't actually see because it's gone nice and blurred. There you go. It's the Stamps of Barbados, which is Edmund Bailey's book. It's brilliant. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. He did three books. He did two of these about the stamps, and then he's done one about the post offices. The post offices one has all the rates, the routes, and all the stuff in it. So I use that one very, very frequently. And the one I've just shown you has all the details about the stamps. I tend to start with the books. So I've got his books, I've got Edward Proud's books, I've got the auction catalogues of the auctions that have gone through. So I'll tend to start there if I can, but then I'll go online because I know that the West Indies Philatelic Study Group website's got some amazing resources on it, which I can research. I'm also a member of the Royal, so I can go into their website and research through any of their stuff and find details from that. So I would say if you have to put a figure on it, it's 50-50, right?
Yeah.
Because why
Yeah.
not? But the books are really, really important because that's the sort of the core source of knowledge. These are, in some cases, contemporaneous bits of knowledge which you can't find these days. Great example. I found a piece on the West Indies philatelic. Oh, actually, no, it wasn't. It was on the Royals website. I went back on the old Royal publications and I found a publication, paper that someone had written in the 1950s. Um, and I also collect the stamp list covers of 1893, where the Barbados Crown Circle Chancellor was put into use. And there's lots of covers to F. Craig at Colonnade in Barbados in Bridgetown. And I had no ideas who this F. Craig was until I went back to the original research. And these guys were saying, yeah, he was the chairman of the Barbados Philatelic Society at the time.
Oh,
That explains it.
yeah,
So yeah, there's loads of information out there. How you get to it is entirely up to you. But I tend to use a bit of both these days, and I am starting to try and use some of the AI tools, but some of them are very inconsistent. You ask AI tools about anything to do with Barbados philately, it'll make stuff up. And I know because I've asked it some questions, and it usually makes up stuff, usually around what I've written already, because it references my website. So.
there's a YouTube video on the PTS and Stampex's YouTube channel about the importance of philatelic literature, having a library, using reference collections. And we've also started a YouTube series with the PTS member HH Sales, although Pennymead, you mentioned earlier, Pennymead is also a PTS member, trusted philatelic dealer, and, you know, about the importance of books. So good to sort of see that as being something that
Yeah.
is kind of taking that next step in your journey. Had you been to Barbados before you chose to
Yes.
study Barbados?
Yes.
And how many times do you go to Barbados now? Do you do research there?
Okay. So yes, yes, and yes. So yeah, I had been to Barbados. I first went back in the 1990s, um, and it would have been early 90s. Just once on a cruise, we'd stopped there for one day, and I thought, wow, this is wonderful. I love this place. I'd love to come back, and I never did, until I met my wife. My wife had said to me, she said, I love Barbados. Well, I've been, I thought it was great. And so we started going back. So I'd been about 4 or 5 times before I started collecting. Now I think I've been 16 times. My
Wow.
wife's been 21, 22 times. We're we're pretty well known. The ladies in the Philatelic Bureau know me. I'm the only person who bangs the drum for Barbados stamps globally. I do it on my social channels, so you'll find me on Facebook, you'll find me on Instagram, you'll find me on Twitter or X. Um, and yes, we do go back as often as we possibly can. We went last year, which was lovely. Really had a great time there. We can't go this year because we've got other commitments, but we are going next year in 2027 again. So I'm
Oh,
really looking forward to that. And one of the things I've done over the intervening years is, and Suzanne knows this, which is where we started our conversation. Those registered envelopes I've just shown in the display are all nice card or hard paper envelopes. This was sort of the style, if you like, back in the Victorian times. Those carry through to George the Sixth and then into the QE2 period. But sometime in the 90s and the QE2, they got rid of them completely and they introduced these plastic envelopes, which nobody keeps. Everyone just rips open plastic stuff and throws it in the bin. So I decided, because there's two different sizes, an A5 and an A4 size, I decided it would be a great idea to try and get one of each from each of the post offices on Barbados. Took me 10 years to do it,
wow.
going back and forward, but I've got it. I've actually got A5 and A4 from all 19 post offices that they were at the time anyway. So yes, again, yet another facet of the collecting, but that's what I do when I go to the island. I do some research in the Philatelic Bureau. The ladies have got some resources there. There's more research needed for the next book I'm planning to write, which is a book about the uh, postal stationery of Barbados. But for that, I'm going to have to get into the post office archives, and that's going to be a bit of a big job. So I might
Okay.
do that next year.
So thank you so, so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Is
you
there
for the
anything
invite.
else?
And well, thank you for your patience in waiting for me to finally put a presentation together for you.
Thank you
Um,
so
I'll,
much.
I'll try not to wait so long for the next one.
Oh yeah, I'll ask you next year for live from Barbados next year, maybe.
Who knows? Who can tell?
Okay, thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. Thanks,
See
Jonathan.
you later.
Bye
See
now.
you
Thanks,
soon. Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope to see you at our next Stampex show, at Virtual Stampex or in person in London.